Hello everyone, hopefully my voice is loud enough. The title of tonight's episode, is inspired out of the concept of the collective ambition of humanity. I'm pretty much realizing that every person has their own internal dimension unless they communicate or express it or have the intention or directive to express it. Their inner dimensions will remain hidden. So, in some sense, let's think of it that we are a species that has an external life and an internal life. The external life is open to everybody, everybody can see the external reality. The inner reality, the first bridge we made between the internal dimension and the external dimension was language. Suddenly, something that somebody knew could help somebody else who didn't know something. For example, there was a volcano kind of eruption, and somebody saw the burning lava, came to the other person, shared his inner dimension, even the person couldn't see the lava, and then the person kind of accepted and left the place, for example. I have personally found it relatively difficult at times to remain content with the internal dimension. When I was younger, any moment the internal dimension changed, I thought externality was being wild. This is because when I was younger, I used to consider myself as a thought. That means anybody came and put the wrong thought of myself in my head, I would rage against it, you know. But later on, you'll realize that it's as if we solidify ourselves in what is real to us. The Rig Vedas has this quote where it says the mind is a slave to the real. I heard that and I was like, whoa. And I realized what it means is that the mind is a slave to the real because reality is its effect. It's like an unreal phenomena is expressing in real ways endlessly. Rene Descartes, this is a story I often share. Rene Descartes, this French philosopher, evidently he was this young kid in a bunker, like back in the day in some barracks sleeping, and he gets this dream. And in the dream, a sort of angelic figure comes to him and says, Rene. The angelic figure comes and says, Hey, Rene. The angelic figure comes and reveals to Rene Descartes and tells him that the next conquest of nature is being done through math and number, through calculation and through number. And so Rene Descartes' mind opened up to how the unnatural could serve the natural. Rene Descartes' attention eventually evolved to a point where his approach to truth was a methodical doubt. What I mean by that is this dude was like, I'm doubting everything. He's like, I'm doubting. Somebody brought him pie. He's like, I doubt the existence of this pie. Rene Descartes realized he can doubt everything except the doubter. The doubter came across to him as an isolated thinking subject. Therefore, he realized that the ego is kind of the undoubtable in some sense. Later on, we have Hegel, this German philosopher, kind of giving a response to Rene Descartes, kind of correcting him as the future generations is kind of written in the stars of their duty. You know, they have to, in some sense, liberate the past from its beliefs. So what happens is Hegel tells Rene Descartes, kind of course, there were different time periods, but Hegel's response to Rene Descartes is that even your consideration of the isolated thinking subject requires first a collective analysis, a sort of collective system in place. The fact that you have accepted the isolated thinking subject as the undoubtable is in some sense you still having not doubted the language that you require to be an individual to even have that definition. And so, of course, I believe, I don't know when it was exactly, but some point in our past, human beings suddenly became super sensitive to thought. You know, not all human beings, of course, not all lifetimes are designed for the same result. You know, there's even the story of one of Christ's disciples, Thomas, Thomas the Doubter. And Thomas the Doubter was evidently like a disciple of Christ where suddenly he sees like he comes late somewhere and people tell him Christ was just here and you missed him, and the man doubts the that Christ was there, and he's like, unless I could put my hand on the wound, I will not know. I will not know if how would I say it, like, unless I put my hand in the wound of the resurrected Christ, it's as if Thomas would not believe. And so something happens that Thomas is like the only one, I guess, in Christian theology. In some sense, if he finds a moment where Christ comes and Christ tells him, come and touch the wound, as if Christ appears, and his doubt in some sense breaks through the confirmation of reality's progression, right? His experience moved forward and then his ideology followed. And so there's something profound. Human beings have different preferences, they have different styles, they have different motivations throughout life. These motivations arise from a combination of internal phenomena and external phenomena. Internal phenomena can be said to include memory, imagination, structure, form, and anything that moves quicker than matter. See, if the world around you was changing much faster than you can move, it's as if there would be no sense of you. But because the world changes at a slow enough pace where there is the human biological existence valid, it's as if there's a strange opportunity, as if consciousness is provided by the world changing slower than it. If things, imagine like you stepped on a like you're walking, and every step you take, the surface of the world changes. It's like you take one step, it's suddenly rocky. If you take one step, it's suddenly a grassland. You take one step, it's suddenly your feet's in the water. And so you see, it's like the texture. If the external reality changes so quick, you won't even have a reference point for thought. I believe it was talk number 438. In 2016, I find myself visiting um, uh, Iran, where I was born, and I find myself in a gathering where, strangely, there's people speaking about metaphysics and the nature of conscious existence. Pretty much, it was like a spiritual gathering, underground spiritual gathering. And so this spiritual gathering, various people who had the name master in front of them, like Ustad, Ustad this guy, Ustad that guy, master this guy, master that guy, kind of like they all come on stage and they all talk. And of course, the whole point of the gathering. It's called the spiritual gathering. That means all the people. It's like in Iranian culture, I found something unique that I find it's present in other cultures as well, but I've been introduced to it through the Persian cultural lens. And so what it is, it's literally like grown people who have lives and everything. They find one evening to all gather and conceptualize what the world means. It's like a tribal evolutionary pattern of the tribe wondering what it means to itself. And then the sophistication of the various cultural programs that come and dominate the world. I've seen this sort of thing in, how would I say it? Like, literally, the cultural program could define you more than the natural program. There is a magnificence to life that has to do with what comes from the unknown to the known. How the pilot of consciousness navigates their experiential attention through unknown existential fields. Pretty much your imagination, you think it belongs to you, but it is simply a generation of the moment. When you get this sense of momentary generation, you kind of calm down from all your beliefs. These even include the various subconscious beliefs which the person has emotionally made. If you look at what emotions are like two realities being compared. You see, you cannot have an emotion in one moment. There needs to be some sort of active change to introduce another context that then the person can become emotional. Because it's all centering around the character and the story. This is why I realized, like, I've seen many human beings since I opened my eyes in this world, and I'll tell you, the most incredible ones have been storytellers. Let me tell you why. Because in their stories, they kept the treasures of the mind relevant. You see, it's like some people read books because they're being told to. Some people read books because that is their only way out. They have to see more than they did yesterday to be free more than they were yesterday. Because emotions are valuable, of course, but if the cultural program becomes too emotionally defined, it will inevitably lead to chaos. Because to be honest, you can't be too emotional when it comes to discipline. Most people think strength is a physical thing. No, its strength is how aware your free will is of itself. There can be no other strength. There can legit be, it's like in your mind, there requires something to be real before externally it becomes unreal. Usually, a person who has intense desires has intense fears. It's kind of like you get two for the price of one. They come together, fear and desire. I honestly wish I had realized this when I was younger, because I felt there were two different ways where the chaos of the world was approaching, but later on I realized even chaos is self-generated. That is the magnificence of the free will, because there's many paradoxical kind of philosophical introspection, especially for certain people who are raised around environments where religious ideology is alive in the mind of people. Every person has a type of ideology of life. Their life tends to be a story to them unless it physically things become a bit turbulent, and then in that instant the person will realize how much they care for their belief and how much they don't. kind of like that moment, you know, it's like everybody was like having a good night, you know, on the Titanic, and then the moment the shipwreck occurred, it's as if everybody was running for a boat. When I see Elon Musk kind of try to land man on Mars by the year of 2022, something like that, you know what I see? I see a man who's running for the boat. It's as if the whole planet, inevitably, there's extinction coming. You know, you don't know when this guest will knock on your door. You don't know when your last moment in existence is. This is why there is the inner permission of reverence and sacredness. What is sacred because of its novelty. It's like when somebody sees something, um, imagine like that kid from the ET kind of going to the scientific community. He's like, guys, what the fuck is this? Excuse my language. The shadow is the limit of the personal self. Let me explain this. This is kind of cool. I got to start off by painting the context with a quote from Carl Jung. Carl Jung says, unless you make the unconscious conscious, it will dictate your life and you will call it fate. Now, why? Why this sentence has reached our ear? Let me tell you. Because the unconscious is where imagination truly lives. You cannot pinpoint imagination. It's something where you try to touch it instantly, it vanishes. This is the same with pride. You know, it's as if like the person who doesn't deserve the crown picks up the crown right about when he's about to put the metal crown on his head. The crown becomes made of paper. You know, and he doesn't understand this man who's trying to be king of his moment. He picks up the crown, it just endless times. The moment he takes the paper crown off his head, it becomes a golden crown. The moment it goes on his head, it becomes a paper crown. The unconscious is the edge of your knowledge. Aldous Huxley says there are things known and things unknown, and in between are the doors of perception. So that's where our knowledge appears. Right now, I'm speaking to you in the waking state. There's a biological program active. There is also a subjective program active, but there is also a sense of awareness to that which is active as the unknown of the moment. You have to respect it. It's kind of something that many people, like, of course, I understand there's crazy people everywhere, you know? but, but, for example, when we see how can I tell you, like being raised in Iran till the age of 7, I saw things that were gracious. I saw human beings as if there was this kind of plumber who had entered the house in Iran, and the plumber covered his eyes. He entered the room, and they would say like "Ya Allah," like as if like they're saying I'm entering the room. You know, they would say "Ya Allah," and then the person enters the room and he's covering his head. The man literally the plumber has entered the house of a client where literally the plumber is moving his gaze away in case there's women who are not there isn't proper clothing on women. You see? So it was a sort of internal restriction imposed by the cultural program, or the more internal program, like who the person was actually. This is what I found very fascinating about the mystical approach to the unconscious. Anybody who believes in religion pretty much believes man, the human mind, can communicate to the other, the invisible other. We must be careful not to make the world lifeless. At the same time, we must not make the world so alive that all it can see is its own death. You see, it's like some philosophers have argued, okay, by the year 2045, futurists such as Ray Kurzweil say that like we're going to reach a singularity, a sort of technological level where technology is aware of itself, and we're no longer the best species, and eventually the whole world will become a technological place. So this man is seeing pretty much the conquering of one reality of another, from the natural kingdom being conquered by the technological kingdom. And the technological kingdom's strange energetic inspiration is the human being for now until the year 2045. It's kind of like as if like the tenant, the landlord of extinction has come and told the tenant, which is the human species, hey man, you have till 2045 to get me the rent, to get your rhythm with nature back. Unless, then others, a sort of other intentions. You see, because we're no longer in a domain of just human bodies, we're in the domain of human minds, and human minds are in a realm where minds endlessly are everywhere. Your mind can appear to you as separate, it can appear to you as not separate. All of metaphysical, like let me tell you what I laugh. This is why I say language is the only thing that the philosophers need to study. Human experience should be about innovation. It should be about people realizing their eyes have a value that only they carry and can share. Literally, no other person has the DNA of your ancestors. Just think about that. Think about what kind of unique potential you harbor within. What kind of ability or moment you may find where a sort of abidance with causality occurs, regardless of the effect. I want to share two stories I've created. I write often, and recently I've kind of realized the power of short stories. So, in some sense, I want to share a story. It's a story in a world where it's called Giant Coat World. And so, this short story that I've written, it's about this kind of world where men and women, their psychological structures, just like nowadays, kind of have battled to a point where men and women are saying they are equal in all ways. So what that means we are saying the external ability is the same regardless of the format. right? The external output. But so in my world, what's occurred is that men and women have all are wearing giant coats that hide their body except their heads. So in some sense, nobody can see the arms, the legs of the person, the physical body. They can only see from the neck up, like just the heads of the people. So and it's this world where everybody is walking in giant coats, kind of like these bunkers, of who they are. And so in this world, I'm kind of reflecting how it's at a kind of like it's. I'm kind of drawing it with the same times that the car was being made, in the same sort. I'm painting the picture like with a Western atmosphere in mind. But what I'm saying is, in this short story, I'm trying to suggest that our desire to be equal or to have the same power as the most powerful is a sort of chaos. It's as if you it's like seeking freedom too much becomes chaotic. Have you noticed? If you're seeking freedom all the time, that means you're a person who is never free. So this is one story. Of course, it's better if you read it. Oh, honestly, a glass of cold orange juice can bring world peace. I believe this. Intelligence's evolution can be said to be the same as discovering more about your style. What I mean by this is that regardless of the world you're in, there is some energetic phenomena that is being you before we give it names, structure, past history, whatever. Past history, future, whatever, you know? Once you realize you are the presence, not the personality of the moment, you get access to how the presence is naturally being, which is an intelligence on its own. It's an intelligence that trusts the external regardless of the internal phenomena and trusts the internal regardless of the external phenomena. At worst situation, what happens is if we have a sort of consideration, if there's even 0.00 whatever amount of zeros you want, 1% chance that there's a multidimensionality in this world, it's not just Earth here. It's as if, listen to that statement, it's not just Earth here. That means how we're defining here cannot just be limited to the idea of Earth. That suggests multiple dimensions. Rene Descartes, he spoke about the mind and body's dualism. Simply said, he's saying that the mind is in its own dimension, the body is in its own dimension. And so when the objective dimension becomes empty, does that mean the subjective dimension becomes empty? No. It's as if you step out, kind of like you get out of a swimming pool of materialistic existence into kind of like the open fields of your mind's eye. And you suddenly slowly navigate out of structural existence. This is why there's been something very profound. Certain ancient cultures and mystical cultures speak about this, that at the time of death, the person is visited. The person dies and their soul is shocked standing beside their body, and just crowds of their ancestors or people they know approach them. Even we had the kind of prince in the battlefield die, and it's like when the king looked at his son who had died, the king kind of saw the spirit of his son, kind of like, how would I say it? It was like this Lord of the Rings scene where Gandalf is telling Theoden like his son is his son will find his way to the halls of his fathers. You know? And so what that means is like there is something more. Now, this something more is reacting to a sort of community, as if you are such a social creature, an extrovert in the afterlife is the mind is simulating various communities. Okay? Now some in the Buddhist framework, if we take it, it's kind of like it's as if that sort of projection is a sort of wrong direction. To in pure Buddhist thought, an incarnation is not a good thing, you know, because they see multiple dimensions. So it's like you've come down to the lesser worlds again, the worlds of the five elements, you know, earth, air, fire, water, and ether. Ether is space. In ancient times, the way they considered the periodic table was they considered space an element too. Just like how fish in the ocean cannot say the water is space. But nowadays, space for us is just pure emptiness. It is kind of like the reality behind the number zero. You see, you cannot divide a number by zero, because it's as if you're dividing an existential phenomenon with a non-existential phenomenon. So zero can be said to be the hollow shadow of one, as if the number zero never exists, to be honest. It is the void that keeps all the matter in place. So Mr. Within is saying there are some people like Elon Musk, they're advancing our external technologies. And there were some people like Carl Jung and many of the mystics who were advancing the inner technology. They wanted to see how the mind would respond in a natural environment without being imposed a certain pattern of behavior. There's this quote that says, "Habit is the decay of the mind." What that means is not like you suddenly freak out. It means that anything you repeat after its usefulness, it will become less and less useful. Less and less useful. So your mind gets bored, and when it gets bored, it still has to do something, so it just builds on that belief. So what that means is like when you ask a religious person if they can imagine what's happening in the Hadron Collider, like some religious person in a village, that person has no idea, no reality. But you ask them if they can imagine how God is keeping the sun there, and their religious reality has much to say. You see, this is why, like I see it in interviews, where you can pinpoint where the person is looking at the world. It's like, what kind of world are the eyes of human beings seeing that is real? When you ask this question, you understand why we evolved. It's as if, like, right now, Mr. Within is just still trying to tell this ideal worshipping species that we are more multidimensional than we think, you know? But at the same time, there is such multidimensionality at work that it's even more supreme than you realizing a word in a dictionary can have multiple meanings. You see, language, every word you say is like a unique weapon that requires to be wielded properly. I say weapon because I personally, my mind playfully has animated a war with language ever since my childhood. It's as if I have been fighting language off. And so what I mean by that is that language is an imposter for the direct experience. Language is a technology. Literally, you are not the motorcycle you're riding, you know? In that moment, of course, you are. Your destiny is like you're one and the same with that motorcycle on the highway. But at the same time, only the spirit of excitement can command the lesser worlds. There's this incredible story of this yogi named Shri Ramana Maharshi, this enlightened sage. And this sage was so enlightened, and some people kind of realized his silence, like there was something, it's as if he was just silently sitting there, but what he was and what his awareness was beyond. And so the reason is because in his silence, his soul had been given greater authorization to exist. We think the soul is eternal, it's always there, buddy. No, the soul is, every moment is a story you write. It's just that your mind is holding the pen, not your hand. The language wars will continue. And the best thing we can do about war is at least use the wasted energy. What I mean by that is that you learn from mistakes, because a mistake is when the better possibility was denied. You know, I have found myself in many moments where suddenly I was running after a certain purpose of meaning, a certain direction where I thought it was the right direction towards my truth, and right when I'm running there, suddenly I see it's a dead end. Imagine running after something, imagine having a sort of ideological structure since your childhood, that suddenly you reach a dead end and the ideological structure has nothing else it can do but to just dismantle. Literally, like it's a robot that if this robot stops running, it breaks. And when we become robotic citizens, it would be the same. It'd be kind of bad because you would be energy. Like once they get rid of your mind, you will be an energetic phenomenon. But the thing is that the mind is an opportunity. I want you to think as if the concept of war, the concept of evil, the concept of corruption never existed. I want you to just think, how much more evolved would we be if our minds evolved rather than just our bodies? And what if that evolution is, it's like kind of strange. It's like the Western child feared death and suddenly heard an Eastern story where there was something that could never die. And so the mind wanders looking at the sky. Right now I'm seeing the glow of the moon behind branches, you know, and what I see is the obstruction of truth, but truth is here, as if truth is in another room. Both your feet and truth's feet are in the same moment. But it's as if the way the personality is looking for something chains it. Sometimes the inability to make the, like, you got to see the opportunity cost of desire and fear. You know, there's been times where like I got too afraid, and then it was like I laughed at my fear. You know, I laughed at how ridiculously there was fear in that moment. We have to change with a changing world, um, or it doesn't make sense. There can be no greater natural purpose than to live in this life. So many people are like, what is my purpose in this life? like perfect robots. What is my purpose? It's like when I see the New Age community, it's just robots running after better programs. What it is you gotta evoke the spirit of the self of selves in ancient times, they would say. Kabir, this Vedic yogi, I'll tell you the story about Sri Ramana Maharshi in a second, but let me say this. Kabir, he looks at one of his students and he shouts. He's this enlightened yogi. And he says, "Student, tell me, what is God?" And the student, like in that intensity, shouts back, "God is the breath inside the breath." And there's complete silence. Sri Ramana Maharshi, this next level holy man. He's honestly an incredible figure in history to observe. Anyways, Sri Ramana Maharshi, usually he's surrounded by disciples, but he decides to walk alone towards like a neighboring town. And as he's walking, he goes outside evidently, and he finds this tree that has there's no leaves on the tree, and he just lies there, like just kind of sits there, you know. He sits there, and his soul is kind of like, some people have said, the incarnation of silence again. So it's one of those things where he just silently sits, kind of like Buddha, but in his own way. And so what happens is, suddenly he opens his eyes and notices the branches of the trees, there's blossoms, and he notices there's 5 people standing in front of him, 5 random people. And so suddenly a dialogue occurs, and those 5 random people introduce themselves as the gods of the different heavens. The gods of the different heavens, as if they've entered certain human bodies and come and talk to this guy. And it's as if there's this dialogue where Ramana Maharshi, it seems that he asks, like, who are you guys? Like, why are you guys here, or something like that? And the gods of the heavens who were it came through the human kind of vessels. They say you have a silence that we have never seen before. And so it's as if the moral of the story is a suggestion of the inefficiency of the civilization being to the unnecessary noise in the environment. When I say noise, I don't mean just external noise. I mean ideological disturbance. When you give a young child an iPhone, like some parents are this reckless, they give the child an iPhone, you know, and then the child's playing just a simple game, but there's so many ads that pop up, which are certain images the child's mind has to repetitively consider. It's so important, certain actions that children must do at a young age, you know. They must literally be introduced to various realities. And so silence has a liberating force behind it. It's kind of like when you stop chasing the butterfly and you sit by nature, it's like the butterfly comes to you. You know, when you have the same approach with your creativity, then you are not imposing imagination. You are not forcing truth to be here. You are not trying to hold the neck of the invisible to choke it out to bring it here. You know, that is the curiosity of the cat. They are stabbing first. They are biting first into the unknown. So the bridges eventually between different human beings' internal dimensions, it's made through language and it's made through the evolution of communication. And communication is the only tool we have, the only technology accessible to come into resolution. As if two human beings or two creatures are having two different projections of the same moment, and so only through their communication, language, tolerance to listen to each other's reality can they emerge and bridge to a new reality. It's as if you want to use the efficiency of 8 billion people, you have to make them care for where they are, or they will not be efficient. They will live like bewildered beasts in their savage kingdom. Another story I've written, it's like this dialogue between this, like the richest man in the world, the second richest man in the world, and his son. And his son is like has the ethics of a mafioso, like, even though he's just a rich, like incredibly rich kid as well, right? And so this rich kid comes to his dad and he says, "Dad, I know you're the second richest guy, but the son of the first richest guy is acting like a tough guy, and so I want to take down the richest guy." So he's telling you, like, imagine the son, the rich son of like the second richest man is saying, "I want to like take down, the richest guy, so then I'll automatically you'll be the richest man." And it's like this whole dialogue the father has with his son, where he says, "Son, you are not seeing the sun." You may think it's easier to take, but it is not. You cannot take something without the moment your mind's ownership touches an objective phenomena as your own. You have and brought a burden. You have made your soul heavy. And so you have to have an ability. This is all Mr. Within is saying, like, if one thing you take away from these talks, take away this metaphor, the metaphor of the eagle. And the eagle is like a majestic animal. It's like the king of the sky, you know. And so the eagle is, in some sense, you can see from the sky the whole forest, or you can land on a certain branch of mountains. Open your eyes to a world that could never be closed by language. Language is the bridge. It's a technology that we literally have to use a bridge to comprehend each other's minds, to realize the value of the mind, and then to see what this whole field of intelligence is leading to. Nobody knows. It has too many unknown factors. Anytime something big happens, it goes out of the control of an individual. And when something too big happens, it becomes something where the individual never had control in the first place. So it's as if like your intentions manifest in accordance to your vision of the world. If you trust the world, it will trust you. If you don't trust the world, then in some sense, every man can,